So, yep, have your papers for notes and all that goodness. Obviously, recording this for posterity's sake for anyone who is not here. All right, so Incan Society. Now, there were local governors divided up, and they were in charge of getting the mita, the labor tax, because they didn't have money in the Inca, as we sing in our song. So instead of going and saying, all right, Zaine, you pay me $10, and Leighton pays me $10, I'm going to say, all right, Zaine, you're going to grow potatoes. And Leighton, you're going to grow corn. And Eli, you're going to go and build me this palace. So you'd either do your work or you would do your crops. It could even also be, too, that you like work in the army. So Jude's mita might be he serves in the army. The Koya is the fancy name for the queen. Now, the Sapa Inca will have multiple wives, but the Koya is the main queen, the one that has all the full power. And when Sapa Inca is gone, she winds up going and being in charge of the religious aspects. Hopefully, Rajveer is turning off the TV and not turning on his favorite show. Oh, his lights. Okay. Dude, it's okay, man. I wasn't like really actually going to be mad at you, but it was fun. The look on his face, he like had panic, like, oh no, I'm in trouble. Now, remember, we want to be not writing everything word for word, getting the short idea. And the nobles are going to rule. And when I say the rule, we don't even have an idea of what it feels like for how they would have ruled. And we're going to see that very soon for what they would do. But they literally controlled every single aspect of your life. Like your bedtime, that was a law. Like literally, it's like, all right, people need to be sleeping from 9 to 6. Iris has a look of puzzlement on her face, but yeah, you had a state mandated bedtime. When you would take a bath was dictated by law. Eli can take a bath on Thursdays and Saturdays and Mondays at 6:30 a.m. to 6:40 a.m. That's what you get. So they decided when you would take a bath, what job you would have. I mean, everything. And guess what? Jude's out wandering the streets, past his bedtime. The punishment was the death penalty. Can you believe that? So everything about people's lives were controlled. And basically, if you didn't do what the government said, death penalty, execution. Isn't that wild? Ugh, glad we don't live like that. Yes, Eli, sir. Okay, so Eli just asked, would they do the execution in public to make an example? And I do not know for certain. Because from what the sources say, at least, Eli and everyone, is the Spanish didn't write of the Inca having any crimes. And the Inca would say, oh, we don't have crimes. Which, if you think about it, if even doing the smallest thing wrong causes the death penalty, it's a deterrent. People aren't going to want to break laws because people like being alive. So Lydia says, so they're parents, but instead of children, they are parents of a country. Yeah, kind of. And super duper harsh. I like that analogy there, darling. So, what you need to know from this slide. People paid with their work, which is called the mita, which we have right here. The mita, writing it down. Mita. There's like an apostrophe somewhere, but I can't be troubled. I'll put it in the chat even for you folks there. All right. So you need to know they paid with their work, the mita, and that the nobles had complete control over people's lives. Which is wild. I can't imagine that whole like state mandated bedtime thing. All right. Oops. Gotta go there. All right. Now, here is what they would do to people. And once again, you need to make sure you're shortening these ideas here. So the first thing that I would shorten and paraphrase is when they came in and conquered. So Zaine comes and conquers your village. Here's the first thing Zaine does. She says, all right, Delicia, you're moving over there. Eli, you're moving over there. Jude, you're moving over there. So the only original person is Leighton. And then Zaine would move people from other parts of the empire into the village. And the whole reason why they would do this is because you're going to move to places where people you don't know, and they might speak a different dialect from you. So you can't work together to rebel against the Inca. You're stuck. So that's what they would do. They would go and make people all move around. They'd move them across so they couldn't do anything about rebelling against them. We know that they kept track of records using the quipu, those knots and strings. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I'm going to show you a picture on the next slide, but like literally, like Leighton looks at this, looks like just a tangle of knots, and she's like, oh yeah, this means that last year we had 40 bushels of corn. Over here we went and sheared 5,000 llamas. Over here, Delicia won a gold medal 3 years ago in the Olympics. Like Leighton could just read it. When like to us, it looks like, okay, it's a string. There's knots on it. It's pretty cool. They had a huge road system. They had 12,500 miles of roads, but people weren't allowed on them unless they were the army. So the army and the government could use the roads, but Delicia couldn't go use it to visit grandma. Veronica couldn't go visit her cousin Sally using the roads. Only the military could use the roads. But here's one of the things that really gets everybody that you have to realize. According to the Inca, Sapa Inca owned everything. So that headset you're wearing, Nora, Sapa's Incas. That cool sweatshirt you have, Sapa Incas. Whatever that pink thing that's melding in with the flowers that I can't tell, Sapa Incas. Rajira's fancy chair, Sapa Incas. Everything was Sapa Incas. The food you grew was Sapa Incas. So in fact, if you went and Rachel was growing crops, she was growing potatoes. That was one of their most common crops. They would go and collect all of the potatoes that Rachel grew and then give her some of those potatoes back for her family to have food. So A believed everything was the Sapa Incas. The house you lived in, the floor you walked on, everything. Isn't that wild? And so, like I said, I'd write this, everything was the Sapa Incas. I would skip these right here. But yeah, so that was the Inca. They controlled every aspect of your life, owned everything. But they said, like, because of this kind of thing, like, Amanda doesn't steal because nothing is Amanda's to begin with. You know, Eli doesn't disobey because he doesn't want to be executed. So some people would say that it was good. I would say not having any freedom would not be good. That's up to everybody. So here's the quipu I was talking about. Like, it's amazing, like how people could look at this and read this thing. And it's like it's a knot, and then there's knots on the knots. I mean, it's wild. This is how they would make some of these knots with it. Here's an example. Yeah, so they'd be super long and all of those things. So there are still some people who can read a quipu today. It's becoming more and more rare, though, which is kind of like scary because here's like a way people like copied their information and kept their records, and it's going to disappear one day, which is kind of sad. All right, this slide right here, I would skip the majority of it. You could say that they built a lot of aqueducts and cities, and they had really awesome stone masonry. They're going to go, and it does kind of look like a grass skirt kind of thing. They worked with metal. You don't have to write this, but they were still Stone Age technology, so it's interesting. They're going to do a lot of art and jewelry and metals, but they will not make any metal tools. So everything that you see that they did, they do by hand and with stone tools. They don't use llamas to help them with work because the llama is the biggest animal they have. Like, and you don't hook like a cart up to a llama. They didn't use the wheel. Like Sapa Inca, he wasn't like, he was carried on a leader. But here's the thing. Despite being Stone Age technology, they did not brain surgery, but they did surgery on the human skull. Like, so for example, Let's pretend that Nalea is playing basketball and she hits her head, gets a bad concussion. Sometimes your concussion can be so bad that they have to go and do something called treffination, which is they drill a small hole into your head and it releases the pressure. Because otherwise, like your brain like expands and like you die because it gets crushed with your own skull. They were doing treffination in the 1400s. They had anesthesia, which of course is, if when you go to the dentist and they have to do something like they numb your face, or you're going to the doctor, they numb you before they do something. In the 1400s. In the American Civil War that was fought between 1860 and 1865, they didn't give Roger anesthesia when they were sawing off his leg. Yeah. The term bite the bullet comes from they would go put a lead bullet in his mouth and he would just bite down as hard as he could as he had to deal with the pain of getting his limb sawed off. That's where bite the bullet gets it. It's terrible. Probably bad for lead poisoning too, but I guess they weren't too worried about that when he was like getting his leg cut off. So it's one of these things where we have low technology, but then incredible achievements. They would build these suspension bridges, which I'm actually going to pull up a picture because for some reason I'm a dum-dum and I neglected to have this picture in my PowerPoint. But these are like the Indiana Jones like style suspension bridges. Like, I mean, check this out, guys. Like, how scary is this? But so they do that with all the road systems. So they had those 1,200 or 12,500 miles of roads, and they got information across because they didn't have writing with the relay messenger system. So, Iris would start running and then she would go and whisper or say what she needed to say to Rachel. Then Rachel would run and then she'd get to Jude and then Jude would run. And when they would do this, they would run across these bridges here. Like, I don't know how much you'd have to pay me to even just go across them, but these guys, they would just run across them. Isn't that wild? Yeah, that's totally the one when you're like in the movies, like the bad guy always cuts it when you're like halfway across and you're like hanging on there. But yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. And you don't have to write anything here, but their most prominent crops are corn, potatoes, coffee, grain for food. But you don't have to write that down. I'm not going to ask you what them. Woven baskets, pamphlets. You could just say that they conquered a lot. We can move through that pretty fast there. They were always conquering, then they forced to pay tribute. That's one of the ways they got wealth. Almost done, guys. I know it's tough. It's kind of warm in here. And it's kind of like, it's been a long day. And finally, you could just say their capital was Cusco, and it was a large city. They had over 300,000 people there. So that's another crazy thing. Like, the Spanish come to the Americas, and they talk about, how advanced the Spanish were because they have guns and steel and all that stuff. But none of the European cities are nearly as large as Tenochtitlan. You got to stop it, broski. Come on, man. As Cuzco, it's pretty incredible. What I kind of like about this picture shows, so they have the old stonework that they did. That's like really perfect, just mixed in with the modern city of Cuzco's like modern masonry and all that stuff. And lots of roads, but we've already talked about that. So that's going to be our notes for the day, my cherubs. Are there any questions or comments from